Hi, this is Ron Willauer again. We have a series of videos on the book of Matthew. This is the second in the series, and we are ready for verse 2 of the first chapter. We only talked about the first verse, but gave background and read some verses from the Old Testament that talked about Jesus would need to be the son of Abraham and the son of David. So I will go ahead and read, though, starting in verse 1. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So we looked at how the Christ that was predicted had to be the son of David and the son of Abraham. And this genealogy is put in by Matthew to show that Jesus was indeed the son of David, the son of Abraham, so that he could be the Christ. If he was not of this descent, not his parents or grandparents, etc., didn't go back to David and Abraham, then he couldn't be the Christ because that's who was predicted. So I'm going to read some more starting in verse 2. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram, and Ram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David the king. Now this is the first third of the genealogy. It goes from Abraham to David, and is the time of the people of God up until they had a king. Well, Saul was king before David, but God rejected Saul because he didn't have the right heart toward God like David did. So there's some interesting things here in the genealogy, even though it's listing, descent, listing who is the father of whom, etc. And that is the women that are listed here, because this is mostly male-dominated. They talk who's the father of whom, and etc., all the males, but there are some mothers listed, not just fathers. And the first one is Tamar. And Tamar, the story regarding her can be found in Genesis chapter 38. And it's kind of a strange story because Judah, one of the 12 sons of Jacob or Israel, he married a lady not part of their family, outside among the nations that they were supposed to go and possess their land. Her name was Shua. And he had 3 sons by her, and the first son married Tamar, and they had no children. God actually killed the first son. It was because he was evil, he was wicked. God took his life. So the custom of the day was, if that happened, the wife would be given to the brother, so that the wife would have children, give birth, but those would be counted as belonging to the first husband. So she was given to Onan, but Onan was also wicked before God, and he took his life. Well, there was one more son, Shealtiel, who was young, and Judah told Tamar, wait until he grows up and is old enough, and I'll give you to him to be his wife, and you can have children through him. So she had no children, but when this last of the third sons got to be aged, Judah didn't give Tamar to this one to be his wife. And Tamar was upset by this because that was the custom, but Judah was afraid, oh, this third son will die too. Well, it wasn't Tamar's reason that they were dying. Bible says it was because the sons were wicked. And the strange story is Tamar sets up on a corner, not exactly a corner, but she sets up as a temple prostitute, and Judah's going by there, and he goes into her as a prostitute, leaves his staff as a pledge that he will give the young goat, I believe it was, to Tamar as payment for the prostitution, and comes about, she's pregnant, and Judah says, come put her to death because she's been immoral. And he says, well, here's who the father is. Here's your scepter. Here's your staff, anyhow. And she was pregnant and gave birth to Perez and Zerah. And Perez ended up being in the line of Jesus. Well, this is a strange story, isn't it? But the point of these women that were included is that, well, number one, the women were important, and they were included too. It's not just male dominated. Number two is, hey, that's kind of a weird situation, you know, a strange story, not really very moral. You know, tomorrow, Judah even said, hey, you're more right in this than I am. But she was included in the lineage and the descent down to Jesus. The point is that God includes anybody that comes to him. You don't have to feel, well, it's not the case so much anymore, but a woman doesn't have the same status with God as a man, or I've had a kind of a weird background or life or immoral background, so I can't come to God. The other examples we'll see also is that there were women who were not of the nation of Israel, that were Gentiles, but the nation of Israel was the people of God. So those outside of the people of God came in. So it's also true that, you know, foreign people, which I am really a foreign person because I'm not from the nation of Israel. Probably most people listening to that's the case. They're not a descent from Jacob or Israel. So the point is, God includes everybody. Anybody can have faith in God and be included. And this was, you know, not totally new, because these stories were from the Old Testament, but it's just to indicate, hey, with Jesus coming, it's not just the people of Israel that can come to God. There's other people. It's not just the righteous that can come. It's not just men that can come. Everybody's included. So the story of Tamar was a little odd, but she was the mother of Perez, and then, you know, he had a son, and we go down to Rahab. And the story of Rahab is in the book of Joshua in the 2nd chapter and 6th chapter. Rahab was a prostitute in Jericho. And when the people of Israel were coming to conquer Jericho, she hid the spies and said, hey, take care of me when you win. Well, she had faith that the people of Israel would win because she had faith in their God, and God honors faith. And here's someone that was a prostitute and someone outside of the nation that was included in the lineage. So, yeah, she was the father of Boaz. Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. She was the mother of Boaz. I said father. big mistake there. Then Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth. Well, Ruth was not a story of, well, she was a prostitute or immoral in any way. She was a virtuous woman, but her husband was from Israel, but she was not. If I remember right, she was from Moab. And her husband died, and she moved to Israel with her mother-in-law, and settled there, and Boaz took her and married her, even though she was a foreign woman, because she said, your people are my people, your God is my God, and she decided to have faith in the one true God. So someone outside of the nation of Israel, again, included. So we'll see here in this, just in this first passage, 3 women included that might indicate that, hey, anybody can be included with God. Those were Tamar and Rahab and Ruth. So that brings us to the second part of the genealogy. So I will read that. It says, and David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. Well, there's another example of something in the lineage that wasn't quite right. David, it just says the wife of Uriah, that was Bathsheba. If you've heard the story of David and Bathsheba, David committed adultery with Bathsheba and had her husband Uriah killed, trying to cover it up. So, Jesus, he comes into the midst of sinners. He's not sinful, but he doesn't have any problem with people that are sinners having a relationship, drawing them to himself. Now there's a problem with sin, but he came in the midst of all of us who are sinners. So anyhow, David, again, I'll go back to reading it, starting again in the middle of verse 6. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah, and Solomon the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph, and Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, and Joram the father of Uzziah, and Uzziah the father of Jotham, and Jotham the father of Ahaz, and Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh the father of Amos, and Amos the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. Now David was a king, and these descendants are kings. This is during the kingly period. The first part of the genealogy was before David the king. It was coming up to the period of kings. Now there's kings all the way, except at the end, the people of Israel were punished for their sin, for their worshiping of idols, and the king of Babylon defeated them and took them all to Babylon, the survivors. And then later another king said, okay, you can go back now. They went back to their own country. So that's significant about that period is you wouldn't necessarily know that, but all these people that are listed were kings. So then verse 12, and after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, and Abiud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Eliud, and Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Matan, and Matan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who was called Christ. So all during this period, these people are not kings. They were defeated by the Babylonians, and so they didn't have a king, and then the Medes and Persians defeated the Babylonians, and they didn't allow them to have a king, and the Greek defeated the Medes and Persians, Alexander the Great. Under them, they didn't have a king. Then the Romans defeated the Greeks. All these are set out in the book of Daniel, predicted ahead of time. So that the time Jesus was born, they were ruled by the Romans. And so they didn't have a king from the line of David all this period. Now it's interesting in verse 16, it says, Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ. He doesn't say that Joseph was the father of Jesus because of the virgin birth. He just says he was the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, just refers to Mary, not to Joseph. So this Jesus who is called Christ, which means the Messiah or the Anointed One, and also indicates his kingship. only had Mary as a mother, not Joseph as the father. And a little bit later, it explicitly talks about the virgin birth, but this is just Matthew in writing is careful not to say that Joseph was the father of Jesus. So all the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations, and from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation to Babylon to the Christ, 14 generations. So Matthew splits it up in threes. As we mentioned already, it was the time up until kings ruled in Israel. The first third, no king. It hadn't happened yet. The next third, there were kings ruling. The last third of the genealogy, they are not kings ruling again. But there's that anticipation, because it was predicted that David would have a son that would sit on the throne, that a king would come and restore that kingdom and kingship and sit on the throne of David. And so the book of Matthew is written during a time where that was anticipation. I mentioned the book of Daniel. It predicted those four empires, the Babylonian, the Medes and Persians, the Greek and the Romans, and that during the time of the Romans, that the Son of Man would come and be like a large mountain and strike the feet of the statue that represented the four empires, and he would reign and rule forever. So people were saying, well, we're in the time of the Romans, and wow, this could happen. Christ, the new king, could come. And so that brings us through verse 17 of the first chapter of Matthew, and as our second video. Thank you for listening. I will move on the next time.